Camera operation. We've gone through hundreds of different features on the camera. How do we actually use the camera out in the field? What are we doing? First off, we're getting ready with our camera. We're getting ready for a big shoot. We're going to make sure we have charged batteries. We've got formatted memory cards. We've got our image quality set where we want it. We've gone through and checked to make sure that our cameras have not been left in some funky mode. And if we're taking a trip, we're going to make sure that our sensor is clean. We don't want to have a dirty sensor for an important shoot. Yeah, the camera has hundreds of features, but there is a few basic ones that we really use. And it's really these 9 basic settings, which all have controls on the outside of the camera. And so on the final 2 pages of the PDF, that is what is going on here. These are the main settings on the camera. So let's look at how we would set this camera up for different types of photography. So the first type of photography we're going to look at is just really simple, basic photography, almost just giving the camera to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing so they can take very, very simple photos. In this case, I like the program mode. It's fast, it's easy, yet it still allows us to get into the menu system. I'm not a big fan of auto ISO, but under the super simple category, it's going to work just fine. I'm going to make sure that exposure compensation is at 0. Auto white balance should be good in most situations. Focusing with one shot is pretty good for general situations, and the focusing area is looking at all 61 focusing points, good for basic situations, and then the drive mode in single as well. Let's look at a few different types of scenarios. Landscape photography, we have subjects that are not moving that we want lots of depth of field on. Ideally, this is being shot from a tripod. You'll have time to get the exposure set right, which is why we would shoot with manual exposure. My first setting would probably be with the ISO to the lowest setting, which is 100 on this camera. Chances are you want a bit of depth of field, so f8, 11, 16, 22, something in that range. And with the shutter speed, that's not nearly as important. It often ends up being a slower shutter speed, which is why you often end up needing a tripod. A pretty good second choice on this is aperture priority, setting a similar aperture. White balance at auto, unless something just doesn't look right to you with the images you're shooting. Your subjects are not moving, so it's the one-shot mode. And the single point, so you can be very precise about where you are focusing. And for the drive mode, you could choose single. You could also use the self-timer there as well. If you're using the cable release, the single would work just fine. All right, next up is portrait photography. Here we're going to shoot with shallower depth of field. We need to be aware of our shutter speeds for our movement hand-holding the camera or our subjects moving around. I prefer to be in manual. I'm going to often want to shoot with shallow depth of field, 1.4, 2, 2.8, depends on the situation. I want a shutter speed of 125th or faster to stop my handheld movement and my subject's movement if they happen to be moving around a little bit. I prefer to be at ISO 100, but I will raise it if necessary. Auto white balance is good for most of the time. I'll adjust as necessary. As long as my subjects aren't moving around too much, I'll leave it in the one-shot mode. And I want to be very precise about where I focus on their eyes, so I will choose the single-point autofocus system. And in general, a single shot at a time usually does just fine. Another common type scenario is action photography, so sports, dance, wildlife, lots of situations where subjects are moving towards you or away from you. Clearly, shutter speeds and focusing are going to be more important here. I do prefer manual exposure. I want to choose a shutter speed fast enough to stop the action as necessary. This is where lenses that have a 2.8 aperture or faster really come into play and are very handy. I prefer to be at the lowest ISO, but I'm always seemingly at 400 or higher. I'm going to keep it in auto white balance, and the important setting in my mind is focusing set on AI servo. This is where it is tracking the focusing towards you and away from you. And with subjects like that, you often need a little bit larger of a zone in which to focus, which is why I like the Zone AF, which is a 9-point focusing. The other larger ones also work quite well, and you'll probably need something more than a single point on that one. And that's, of course, where we're probably going to turn on the high-speed continuous and shoot at around 7 frames per second. The final one I'll leave you with is what I call basic photography. And this is where you don't know what the next shot is, and you kind of want to just have your camera ready for the next available good image to come along the way. In this case, I like a little bit of automation, so the aperture value mode does a pretty good job at that. I'll probably have my camera set to a middle aperture. If I need more or less, I'll dial it in as necessary. I prefer to have my camera at ISO 100 unless I'm thinking I'm going to be under low light or I need faster shutter speeds, and I'll bump it up kind of on an as necessary basis. I'll adjust exposure compensation if necessary, but I'll want to leave it at 0 as a default. Auto white balance is pretty good most of the time. Most of my subjects are not moving that fast, and so one shot works pretty good. Focusing area, I'll probably just choose the single point so I can be very precise about where I'm focused at, and a single shot at a time will do me good in that case. So those are also in the PDF, and so you can take a look at those and put those in your camera bag and review those later on. But if you've made it to this point in the class, I can say congratulations. You are now a Canon 5D Mark IV expert. All right, so in case you're wondering, this is part of my Fast Start series of classes, and so if you have another camera or you're in the future and you have some future camera, well, there's a good chance that I'm going to make a class for that camera. And so Canon and Nikon, I'm making classes for pretty much all their interchangeable lens cameras, but I also have classes for Fuji, Olympus, Sony, and even Panasonic as well. And so if you want to know more about any particular camera, we have that available in a Fast Start class. If you are interested in any of my other classes, I do have those up at Creative Live. I have short classes, I have classes on how to choose your first camera, very long classes, classes on nature landscape, as well as travel photography. And the one that I think is a good matching class to this class is the Canon lens class. So if you want to know more about Canon lenses, we have a lot on that particular one. And so thank you very much for tuning in, and get that camera out there and take some great photos, because at this point, it's not the camera, it's you.